time I ever stepped onto a soccer field is something I will never forget. Picture this: Halifax, 1982. I'm a boisterous 5-year-old in a polyester red and yellow striped kit with 2 long, black, thick braids. And I'm the only little brown girl. I'm standing at the sidelines impatiently because the coach was giving instructions, but I just wanted to run onto the field and take the ball. The grass was freshly cut, and as I stood there, I remember thinking, this is what heaven smells like. I ran onto the field and took the ball with 10 other little kids, not really knowing how to maneuver, but feeling like I belonged there. And outside of my family, there weren't a lot of places that I felt as if I belonged. But here, on the field, the ball didn't discriminate. Soccer gave me an opportunity to be part of a team. I was not very popular in grade school, and despite my tenacity and eager skills during play, I was never picked to be on a team during gym class. And I think this is something a lot of people can relate to, being an outsider. But my heart and my head and my parents kept telling me to stick with it, and there was a place for me, even if I had to carve it out myself. Fast forward to 2019. While I'm still carving out various spaces in my life, sports mean a lot to me. I still play, and although I'm the only brown woman on my team, I can't live without it. And now, sports are not just something I play. I've fallen in love with the way they can be woven into storytelling. I've spent the last 8 years as a sports journalist, advocating for the equality of women, countering gendered Islamophobia, and combating misogyny. I'm often called upon to provide opinions on race and culture in sport through sports stories. You see, sports stories are not just game reports and statistical analysis. They are stories about people, their struggles, their glory, and how they use sport to express themselves. And the stories within sport can hold impactful messages of resilience, glory, and justice. It's really important to understand that the traditional sports system, is predominantly white, able-bodied, cishet men. And sometimes the stories that are reported often lack nuance and underrepresent people like me. And stories of sport, you can go anywhere in the world and find out more about a society based on watching a game or attending a match. And often regions' values are reflected in their sports. And at the core of this is the power of sport to be a vehicle of change and a tool of empowerment. But who tells these stories? Do they reflect the players on the field, the fans in the stadium, and the communities they're intended to unite? Or do we see these stories from a singular lens? When we look at sports media, do we see and hear the voices of our communities? Sports media is saturated with white men, but as the industry grows, people of color, and moreover women of color, need to have opportunities to shine and shed light on stories that we know the public wants to hear. Stories that were underplayed and untouched. The lived experience of a person is very, very, very valuable. You can have a dozen degrees in journalism or 100 accreditations, but if you haven't actually lived through the experience that some players of color feel, like racial bias, you can fall short of doing justice to these stories. Keeping in mind, people of color should not only comment on race and culture in sport, we should be everywhere in sport media, writing, editing, presenting, production, decision-making. And currently, we are not. This is the main reason that I, a mom of 4 and visible Muslim woman, decided to get into this field. Because I was frustrated with the ways that the stories were being told. Now, is it really a problem if we see these stories from one singular lens? I mean, what's the big deal? Last year, a black high school varsity wrestler from New Jersey named Andrew Johnson had to choose between representing his school or be ejected from competition. The reason? He had dreadlocks. In order to compete, Andrew was expected to shed a part of his identity because it was considered unnatural by the white referee. He was not permitted to wear a cap, although that had been done in competition before by others with long hair. Andrew made a really difficult decision that day, and a video of his dreadlocks being chopped off went viral. Local news reports celebrated this and characterized it and him as the epitome of a team player. But when I saw Andrew standing in the middle of that gym at 16, looking numb, being inundated with high fives from his teammates, I felt ill. And I was bitterly disappointed with the way that that story was celebrated and reported. This is not a celebration. But sports media, with their predominantly single lens, didn't explore Andrew's experience, and they couldn't empathize with what he had endured. And sometimes the singular lens means there are important stories that we don't even get to hear. A few years ago, I came across some information that stays with me to this day, that women in Iran are not permitted into stadiums to watch sport. This boggled my mind because Iran actually has a very rich history of supporting women's teams and programs. But this form of gender segregation began at the 1979 revolution and has persisted ever since. With the mission to lend my voice in order to help, I started to write about it. And I got connected to an organization called Open Stadiums, which is a movement of Iranian women seeking to end discrimination and enable women to enter stadiums. This group has been lobbying major sports federations for over 15 years to push Iran to change this. But despite their efforts, little has changed. As a result, it means that women and young girls will dress up as men to sneak into stadiums. Perhaps it's an act of love. Perhaps it's an act of defiance and resistance. But whatever the case, these women risk their lives every time they try to enter a stadium. This has been documented by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch on multiple occasions. Last spring, one of these women, Seher Khodayari, known as Blue Girl in the media, was arrested and faced up to 6 months to 2 years for attempting to enter a stadium dressed as a man. This September, before her trial could begin, Seher stood in front of the courthouse and she set herself on fire. She died 6 days later. To say that this is heartbreaking is an understatement. Must women lose their lives because of their conviction and their love of sport? While this story is complex, it's not only about the tragic loss of her life. This is about a place that bars women from sport, and it is about international governing bodies headed by men who were complicit in the system of exclusion. Make no mistake, sports are inherently political and have always been. Writing about Muslim women in sport, and even what's happening with Iranian women, takes time, understanding of geopolitical and social challenges. And most importantly, it requires the respect of the people who are in the story, Not enough sports journalists get an opportunity to do this. Here, on the other side of the world, things are not as grave, but they're no less important. But we're making progress, right? A few months ago, during the FIFA 2019 Women's World Cup, a Canadian broadcaster had a panel put together of experts. 3 of those experts were former national and professional players. The entire panel was women. And like their men counterparts before them, they offered brilliant commentary, match recaps, statistical analysis, but they also spoke about the challenge in facing women in the beautiful game. They talked about the right for equal pay, sexism, homophobia, and the need for domestic women's leagues in order to develop and grow attention to the game. A columnist labeled this as revolutionary. Okay, revolutionary. This is not a revolution, but it should be our game plan. So, what are we going to do about it? First of all, you can be involved. Share your thoughts. You don't have to be an athlete or journalist. Social media has changed the sports industry in ways we never could have imagined. Previously, the sports spectators and fans used to be on the receiving end. Now, you can share your content, you can amplify it. And this is very important. When I first started my career in sports journalism, I started with a Tumblr blog, and now I have over 100 bylines in notable publications. But we need more. Secondly, diversify your sports media intake. Get your information from people that you might not consider to be sports journalists. Let me use a sports analogy. To only have goalkeepers on a soccer team is not going to be as effective as having defenders, midfielders, and forwards. We need people from all racial backgrounds and gender identities to help sports media grow into something that truly reflects the population. This is key. So, if you don't know where to start, let me tell you. Try the podcast, the sports podcast that I co-created. Me and my co-hosts, Dr. Amir Rose Davis, Jessica Luther, Lindsay Gibbs, and Dr. Brenda Elsey. We talk sports. We critique, we opine, we laugh, and we challenge the status quo. Getting your information and content from places that might not be considered sports journalism actually will draw attention to the stories that were considered unwelcome. Now they will be heard. And this attention one day might lead to women sitting in stadiums in Iran for good. It might mean that women will be paid what they deserve. It might mean that racism in sports no longer festers, and kids like Andrew can proudly compete. We need to deconstruct the current sports media systems, shake it up, take it apart, put it back together with a solid foundation, and one that is more inclusive. We need all kinds of sports stories that feed our soul with a smorgasbord of topics ranging from local to global. Stories that engage us, enlighten us, and connect us with other people. And we need storytellers, sports media, to reflect who we are in the population. So let's start now. So even if, and especially if, you were once on the sidelines like me, and even if you've never been picked for a team in your entire life, join my team. You do not have to wear polyester, but let's change the story.